The morning rain fell in sharp, cold sheets as if the sky itself was punishing the earth. On the edge of a quiet countryside road, Elias Rowan knelt in the mud, helplessly clutching the eviction notice that had been taped to his apartment door just an hour earlier. His hands shook, not from the cold, but from the crushing weight of another failure. He was a single father who had already lost too much. Now, it felt like the last piece of stability he had left for his 10-year-old daughter was slipping from his fingers. The paper wilted in the rain as his breath trembled inside him, and the world seemed to blur into a storm of hopelessness. Ripple of love, if you believe in hope, compassion, and second chances, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Elias rose slowly, wiped his face with the back of his soaked sleeve, and headed toward the roadside where his old pickup truck waited. Today wasn't about him. Today was the day he was supposed to appear in court, again. A custody reassessment case, one he feared he wouldn't win. Not because he was a bad father, but because life had simply broken him too many times, leaving scars he could not hide. His wife had passed away 3 years ago after a long illness, and the medical debts had drained every last drop of hope they once had. Since then, he had juggled small construction jobs, odd repairs, anything that could keep the lights on and food on the table. But when he fell behind on child support during a period with no work, the system tightened around him like a noose. He drove into the storm with his jaw clenched, whispering promises to himself that he would find a way. Autumn would not lose her home. She would not lose him. Miles down the road, the storm had worsened. The wind bent the trees, and rain hammered the pavement so fiercely that visibility was almost non-existent. It was then that he saw her, a red SUV pulled to the shoulder, hazard lights blinking through the haze. A young woman stood outside, soaked, visibly frustrated, struggling to loosen the lug nuts on a flat tire. Her white dress clung to her from the rain, and her arms trembled as she gripped the tire iron with little success. Elias slowed instinctively. He didn't have time. He couldn't risk missing court. But something inside him wouldn't let him pass a person stranded in the storm. He knew too well what abandonment felt like. He pulled over, stepped out into the downpour, and walked toward her. She looked up at him with wide, wary eyes, as though struggling between pride and desperation. Her face was delicate, her expression strained with exhaustion, and her lips parted as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the right words. Elias simply extended a hand, offering reassurance without saying anything. She noticed the mud on his clothes, the exhaustion in his eyes, the quiet resilience in the way he stood. Something about him seemed worn yet profoundly kind. He helped her remove the tire bolts, lifted the spare from the trunk, and knelt to fix the wheel with calm, practiced ease. Rain ran down his face and soaked through his jacket, yet not once did he falter. The woman watched him, curious, noticing how his movements carried a heaviness beyond physical tiredness, as if he was fighting battles far larger than a storm. When the tire was fixed, Elias offered a polite nod and turned to leave, but she called out, asking if he needed a ride somewhere. He declined, saying he couldn't burden her. She insisted. He finally accepted. Inside her SUV, she introduced herself quietly as Liana. She asked where he was headed. When he told her it was the county courthouse, her breath paused for a second, and she looked away to hide the sudden shift in her expression. But he didn't notice. He was lost in thought, silently praying he wouldn't lose his daughter today. The rain hammered the windows as they drove, and Liana listened as Elias recounted bits of his life without meaning to. He spoke about autumn, her laughter, her love for painting, her fear of losing yet another person she loved. Liana felt her heart twist. He spoke with so much sincerity, so much guilt, and yet so much love. It was rare to hear a parent talk that way. They stopped in front of the courthouse. Elias thanked her genuinely, gave her one last tired smile, and hurried inside without asking anything else from her, not even her last name. Liana sat frozen in the driver's seat, her heart thudding in her chest. Her palms grew damp as she slowly reached for her briefcase in the back seat. Inside it lay a folder with a name printed clearly across the top. Elias Rowan, Custody Reassessment Hearing. She was the judge assigned to his case. Her breath caught in her throat. Fate had collided with her in the most unexpected, impossible way. The man who had knelt in the mud to help her, a stranger, was the very father she was supposed to evaluate today. And she had arrived at the courthouse late because of the flat tire. She stepped out, still shaken, and walked into the courtroom. When Elias entered a few moments later, he froze. His eyes widened as he recognized her. She met his gaze, her expression soft yet unreadable. No words were exchanged. But in that single moment, something shifted between them. Compassion, truth, and fate wove together like threads of a story neither of them had expected. The session began. Elias sat nervously, wiping rainwater from his forehead as the social worker presented her concerns: missed payments, unstable housing, irregular work. Every word felt like a blow. Elias lowered his gaze, knowing he had no defense other than the painful truth that he tried, every day he tried. Liana watched him carefully, recalling the sincerity she had seen during their brief encounter. The man who had stopped in a storm without hesitation. The man who had never once complained, even while drenched and exhausted. The man who had nothing to gain by helping her. She saw not a negligent father, but a man crushed by circumstances, still fighting with every ounce of his remaining strength. When it was time for Elias to speak, he rose slowly. His voice shook as he explained what losing his daughter would do to him. He spoke about love, about promises he still intended to keep, about the hope that kept him going. He didn't ask for sympathy, only a chance. By the time he finished, the courtroom had fallen utterly silent. Liana felt her throat tighten. The law demanded fairness. But fairness was not always the same as compassion. And sometimes, compassion illuminated the truth better than any document. She reviewed his case with new eyes, balanced, just, yet deeply human. She granted him an extension, additional support resources, a chance to stabilize his life, and most importantly, she allowed him to keep custody. Elias collapsed into his chair with tears mixing into the rainwater on his face. Relief washed over him like sunlight breaking through a storm. As he exited the courtroom, Liana quietly approached him in the hallway. She didn't reveal anything personal, she couldn't. But she thanked him for his kindness on that rainy road. The look in her eyes said more than words ever could. It was gratitude, admiration, and something fragile and warm forming beneath the surface. The judgment she made was fair. But the understanding she gained about him that day changed everything. And that change, quiet, delicate, and powerful, would ripple into both their lives in ways they had yet to understand. If this story touched your heart, ripple of love, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps keep emotional stories alive. Before the final moment, dear viewers, please comment below what part moved you the most. As Elias walked into the parking lot, he raised his face to the clearing sky. The storm had passed. The air smelled of wet earth and fresh possibility. He pressed a hand over his heart as he imagined Autumn's smile when he told her the news. In that moment, he realized something profound, that sometimes life brings the right souls together not by chance, but by necessity. A single act of kindness had changed everything. Not because he expected anything in return, but because compassion has its own mysterious way of coming back to those who carry it. And somewhere behind him, Judge Liana paused at the courthouse steps, watching him leave with a quiet smile, knowing their paths had crossed for a reason neither of them yet fully understood.